Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for the third of a very special three-part webinar series, Exploring the Legacy of Sefarad. My name is Michael Steinberger, and I am founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, a platform dedicated to promoting the story of Sefarad. Before we get started, it is important to mention the Jewish Heritage Alliance underlying mission is to research, capture, and promote the Sefarad legacy. One of our central platforms in promoting the saga of Sefarad is our educational webinar programs. These programs are delivered in a variety of formats, covering a wide range of topics, and always with experts in the subject being discussed. Today, we are delivering the third segment of the Sefarad, the Untold Story That Changed the World series, delivered by our very own Dr. Isaac Amon, Director of Research and Project Development at Jewish Heritage Alliance. It is noteworthy to mention that our work is endorsed and supported by our global strategic and affiliate partners. So at this time, I would like to thank our co-hosting partners for helping us make this event a success. I would like to thank Fundación Hispano-Judaya, or the Hispanic Jewish Foundation, Anu Museum of the Jewish People, previously Beit Atfusot, the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies, American Sephardic Federation and its Institute of Jewish Experience, the National Museum of American Jewish History, Centro de Estudios Judaicos, European Jewish Community Center, Miller Center for Contemporary Judaic Studies at Feldengreen's program in Judaic Studies, University of Miami. And last but not least, I would like to thank Kulanu. And now let's get started with today's program. At this time, I would like to introduce Dr. Josh Perlman, Chief Curator and Director of Exhibitions and Interpretation at the National Museum of American Jewish History. He is a member of the museum's senior team and oversees the museum's exhibitions and education departments, as well as its artifact collection. Josh has curated award-winning special exhibitions, launched the museum's national curriculum, and served as chief curator for the landmark core exhibition that inaugurated their new building on Philadelphia's Independence Mall. Josh holds dual PhD in Jewish Studies and American History from NYU. Take it away, Josh.
Thank you so very much, Michael. It's such a pleasure to be here with everybody this afternoon. We're so excited about this partnership with the Jewish Heritage Alliance. So as Michael said, I'm Josh Perlman, and I'm representing the National Museum of American Jewish History. Our museum tells more than 360 years of Jewish life in this country, and for all sorts of significant reasons. This partnership with Jewish Heritage Alliance is so fundamental to what we do at our museum, most especially telling the stories of how Sephardic communities and Sephardic culture have been fundamental to what it means to be Jewish in America. What makes our museum so special is that I'm sitting here in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we are telling these stories from the place where our nation was founded. So as you can see, the museum sits across the street from Independence Hall, as well as the Liberty Bell. And therefore, we explore the fundamental meaning of what it means to live in a free society as a Jew. And in doing so, narrate the story of American history through the eyes of Jews. And very much what I would like to invite everybody on the program today to do is come explore that history with us. As you can see from the bottom of the slide, www.nmajh.org, there you can find a robust, expansive collection of programming, of virtual exhibitions. You can explore our collection, you can view past programs, you can really dig deeply into the whole history of Jewish life in colonial and then the United States. And so in that spirit, I'm very excited to be representing the museum on this program, and the past two programs have been fantastic, and I look forward to learning from Isaac today and enjoying Ariel's music. And I give it back to you, Michael.
Thank you, Josh. Thank you for the opening remarks and for sharing with us the important work of the National Museum of American Jewish History. We also look forward to working closely with you in the development of new works and educational webinars detailing the Sefarad influence on the Americas. Thank you. And now I have the honor to introduce today's main speaker and presenter, Dr. Isaac Amon. Dr. Amon is Jewish Heritage Alliance Director of Research and Project Development and is uniquely qualified in delivering our Sefarad, the Untold Story that Changed the World series. Isaac is an attorney and a counselor at law. He graduated summa cum laude with the highest honors in history for his thesis on Spanish Inquisition. He was awarded the Dagen Lubinsky Fellowship and worked at the International Criminal Tribunal for the former Yugoslavia in The Hague, where he met with Benjamin Franz, the last living Nuremberg prosecutor. He has visited execution sites and torture chambers of the Inquisition, as well as Nazi death camps. At the onset of the global pandemic, he was in the Iberian Peninsula researching the Iberian Inquisition. Take it away, Isaac.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, wherever you may be around the globe. It is an honor to welcome you for the third and final webinar in this series on Sefarad, the Untold Story that Changed the World. I'd like to explore this final webinar while we walk in the footsteps of the Crypto-Jews through principally three ways. The first is to briefly examine social customs and religious beliefs of Crypto-Jews. The second is to explore some of the journeys that these Crypto-Jews or conversos made as they crossed oceans and continents. And the third is to look at some key figures who played major roles in great historical events. And so with that, let's get started. As an historical phenomenon, Crypto-Judaism has manifested itself across great expanses of space and time in a number of regions, cultures, and religions. Beginning in the days of classical antiquity and the great empires of old, it continued on through the medieval and modern periods, such as in the Ottoman Empire and Sabbatai Tzvi and his followers, the Donmeh in Iran in the mid-19th century in Mashhad, and it continued into our own time, into living memory in the 20th century when Jews were forced to publicly deny their Jewishness in order to live, particularly in Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union. But of course, our focus today, as it has been in this series, is Crypto-Judaism as manifested in the Iberian context, when Jews were compelled or coerced to convert to Christianity and became nominal Christians, known as New Christians, Cristianos Nuevos in Spain, or Cristãos Novos in Portugal. We would also, of course, refer to these individuals and their descendants as Moranos, Conversos, or Anusim. And so we have to situate ourselves, ladies and gentlemen. By the end of the 15th century, after the great events of 1492, when all officially professing Jews were expelled from Spain due to the Alhambra decree or edict of expulsion, and particularly after 1497, after Portugal had forcibly baptized the normative Jewish community there, the people of the book, the term which is usually applied to Jews, had become people of memory. There were no longer synagogues, schools, study halls, books, or rabbis. Judaism at this point became a religion of oral transmission, centered around the rituals in the home because communal institutions had been shut down. And because it was centered around the home, women became the primary leaders in transmitting the rituals, the knowledge, and the faith to the next generation. And accordingly, they became the primary focus of the Inquisition and when they tried to ferret out Crypto-Judaism. And so looking at just one inquisitorial trial record, of course, of tens of thousands, this showcases really the incredibly complex nature of religious identity, but especially for Crypto-Jews. Jews had been expelled en masse from Spain in 1492, as aforementioned, and a mere 3 years later, Inés López, a 30-year-old widow who lived in Ciudad Real, nearby Toledo, had been charged by inquisitors with Judaizing or practicing Crypto-Judaism. Upon investigation, it was found that her grandparents had been forcibly converted in the Great Conversions or riots of 1391, which we mentioned in part 1. After being interrogated for nearly a year, she confessed to a variety of crypto-Jewish practices, to lighting candles on Friday nights, to wearing clean linen on Saturdays or the Shabbat, to not eating pork, to throwing water on the floor when her father died, and to being instructed in the rituals of the Passover. But repeatedly throughout the proceedings, she disclaimed any intent to practice these rituals. She said she didn't really view them as significant. She had always been told to do so by family or friends for the benefit of her soul. Nonetheless, because inquisitors were pathologically obsessed with action rather than belief, or perhaps it could be expressed as to the inquisitorial mind, action was indicative of inner belief or truth, she was found guilty of Judaizing and forced to atone for this heinous crime in an auto de fe in September of 1496 in the Plaza de Zoco de Ver in Toledo, as seen below. She had to undergo various forms of penance, including being sentenced to house arrest, and she had to wear the dreaded San Benito, as depicted in the famous painting by Francisco Goya atop, the penitential garment draped over the outer clothing, indicating the wearer's name, social status, and crime, in this case, heresy. She was thereupon reconciled to the church. 15 years later, she was denounced a second time by accusers who remained unknown. As you may recall from part 2, the Inquisition thrived upon anonymous denunciations. The accused was never permitted to know the identity of the witnesses or accusers. And although she was permitted defense counsel, little good this did her. In August of 1512, as a repeat heretic, Inés López was burnt at the stake to save her eternal soul. And so the question that the life and the record of Inés López pose to us more than 5 centuries later is, what was her religious identity? She was certainly a new Christian, but can we say she was a crypto-Jew because she practiced Jewish rituals? She herself said she didn't really view them as significant, if she even understood them. And on the other hand, although she was Catholic, did she truly believe in Christian dogmas or tenets? It's not clear. And so I think this trial record does a great job of showing the incredibly complex nature of crypto-Jewish identity. And over the decades and centuries following these great events of the 1490s, as that generation who knew Judaism firsthand died out, it seems inevitable that normative Judaism was going to fade amongst these new Christians. There certainly would be some attachment, as we shall see, to Jewish traditions, beliefs, and memories, but many of the rituals faded away. And so it's imperative to examine, what did crypto-Jews believe, at least to some extent? Now, it's difficult, ladies and gentlemen, to make generalizations, certainly on a phenomenon as vast as crypto-Judaism, something that spans centuries and continents. But a magisterial tome which tackled this with a large amount of success was Secrecy and Deceit, The Religion of the Crypto-Jews by the late Dr. David Gitlitz, a man I was privileged to have been mentored by whilst I wrote my thesis on the Spanish Inquisition. And Professor Gitlitz, in his great work, says that before we can examine the religious identity of new Christians, it is imperative to focus on definitions of Judaism, because that's not so simple. It has changed over the course of time. He identifies at least 5. The first is biological or parentage. A Jew is a person who has Jewish parents, or in traditional halakha, whose mother is Jewish. There is belief. A Jew believes certain core principles. There is practice. A Jew practices key rituals, such as perhaps the rituals that Inés López herself confessed to doing. The fourth is self-conception or self-actualization, where a person chooses to affiliate themselves or identify themselves with the Jewish community or the Jewish faith. And so this would take the form, and this occurs in inquisitorial records, of individuals saying, in my heart, I lit the candles on Friday nights. In my heart, I fasted. In my heart, I did not accept Jesus, so on and so forth. And the fifth, and perhaps the most tragic, is that definition imposed by the outside society. In extremists, this would take the form, as Professor Gitlitz notes, of inquisitors burning crypto-Jews at the stake, something we explored in part 2 for the crime of being Jewish, or in our own time in living memory of the Nazis murdering 6 million men, women, and children for the crime of being Jewish. At this point, when the outside society or external tormentor has defined who a Jew is, observance and belief fade away. And so, bearing these Jewish definitions in mind, we can now look at the spectrum of new Christian identity, and it runs the gamut. On the extremes, we have those who attempted to be purists. We have those who became fervent assimilators, converted to Catholicism, sometimes voluntarily, and some of these people became proselytizers to their former co-religionists. Others became Christian reformers, but they predominantly identified with Christianity. On the far other extreme, we have those who remain crypto-Jews or Judaizers, those who clung on as strenuously as they could to their ancestral faith and traditions. Somewhere in between is where it gets really interesting. We have those who became syncretistic, effectively amalgamating or merging various beliefs and rituals of Judaism and Christianity. We have those who vacillated, often going back and forth between the two religions, never quite sure which religion they belonged to, effectively living in a no man's land. And the fourth and the smallest group would be those who became skeptics, coming to reject both Judaism and Christianity, perhaps organized religion altogether. And as you can see on the left, in this case, they may even have rejected the very concept of a monotheistic God, a God who intervened in the affairs of man, a God who gave his revelation at Mount Sinai. They espoused perhaps a deistic God. They acknowledged the existence of a creator, but believed he did not play a discernible role in the physical world. And a smaller minority perhaps even rejected that conception of the deity and came to be agnostic or even atheist. And so Gitlitz and other scholars, though, looking at the crypto-Jews, the ones who strove to remain faithful to their fathers, they are defined as Catholics without faith and or Jews without knowledge. Now, it has to be remembered, the milieu in which these crypto-Jews lived for centuries was one permeated with Catholicism. It was inconceivable to be anything other than a Catholic. Daily language and discourse, one's mental universe, even the physical landscape were replete with Catholic imagery, such as the cross, the Virgin Mary, the baby Jesus, etc. And so Gitlitz, after scouring these inquisitorial records in Spain, Portugal, and overseas colonies, identifies 5 core principles that it seems all crypto-Jews clung to, even in the absence of all else. They fervently believed, number 1, in monotheism. They rejected the Trinitarian conception of the Godhead as espoused in Catholicism. They believed in the law of Moses, that it had not been abrogated, that it remained intact. Belief alone, however, was insufficient. They believed that observance of the rituals, the commandments, or the mitzvot was required as well. And although they acknowledged that perhaps there was more than one way to reach God, Judaism was the preferred faith. And lastly, and extraordinarily significantly, they categorically rejected the claim of Jesus' messiahship. They believed, as Judaism does, that the Messiah has not yet come. And so this idea of messianism, this fervent belief in imminent redemption or salvation pervaded the crypto-Jewish mind for centuries. It is replete in inquisitorial records, and it persisted across continents and centuries. And it seems to have taken effectively 2 forms. The first redemption would be an immediate exodus or respite from the lands of the persecution. And the second and more important redemption would be the final one, which would constitute an ingathering of the Jewish diaspora in the land of Israel, something that, of course, observant Jews pray for 3 times a day, which they have done for millennia. And so this strain of messianism, this fervent belief in redemption, and a belief that these conversos could help play a role in bringing this about, came to greatly influence the events which were to come. Now, in 1492, after the Alhambra Decree was promulgated, which shattered the unity of Sefarad, as we spoke about in previous talks, Sephardim went everywhere. They went to North Africa, they went throughout the Mediterranean, to the Levant, to the Near East, to the Balkans and the Ottoman Empire. Others, of course, turned west and went into Portugal. Others converted to Christianity. But in 1492, we have to acknowledge there were new Christians who left the peninsula, and they went west across the Atlantic. A number of conversos or new Christians accompanied Christopher Columbus on the first of his 4 voyages on the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria as it departed the port of Palos. And we know at least one of them, quite famously, Luis de Torres, the interpreter or translator, told us in his diary, quote, "The exiles of Sefarad descended to the Mediterranean, searching for passage to a new land where they could openly practice Judaism. I was among them. And I agreed to accompany Columbus because I hoped to find Jewish brethren. We were a large group of conversos living in perpetual fear of the Inquisition. And so the presence of Luis de Torres and other conversos has led many individuals over the ages to speculate as to the religious identity of Christopher Columbus himself. We don't know with certainty whether or not he was a crypto-Jew, but there's extremely strong circumstantial evidence to believe that he was a descendant of Sefarad. The late Estelle Irizarry, in her work, Christopher Columbus, the DNA of his writings, makes quite a compelling case. We know that although Christopher Columbus, or Cristobal Colon, as he was known, was officially from Genoa, Italy, he did not speak Italian. He communicated in Catalan or Castilian, perhaps a form of Ladino. Letters to his sons famously have an acronym at the top left, which is BH, short for the Hebrew phrase Bezrat Hashem, with the help or assistance of God, that many observant Jews continue to put at the top of their letters or emails to this very day. In his last will and testament, Columbus left money to a Jew in Lisbon, and he left money to orphan young girls for their dowries, a traditional Jewish bequest across the ages. And most famously, Columbus delayed the departure of the first voyage from Palos by a day so as to not coincide with Tisha B'Av, the great day of lamentation on the Jewish calendar. Along with Luis de Torres, a number of members of this crew of 90 to 120 men came from places with longstanding Jewish communities throughout Castile and Aragon. And he was financed and backed by leading conversos, among them Luis de San Angel, as seen on the left, and Gabriel Sanchez. And so even if Christopher Columbus himself was not a descendant of Sefarad or crypto-Jew, he certainly lived and operated and was supported by a Jewish and converso milieu. And so following Columbus's departure, which of course discovered, quote unquote, the New World, crypto-Jews took the opportunity and fled the Iberian Peninsula, and they went everywhere. It effectively constituted, it seems, a secondary Sephardic diaspora following the one in 1492. This took them across oceans and continents. So the small group accompanied Columbus and across the Atlantic and set sail due west, leading to thousands more in the following centuries. We have many who, of course, went throughout Europe to the great Protestant ruled cities in the north, in Hamburg, Amsterdam, and London, as we shall see. Others went to the south of France and to the Italian peninsula. Now, they either settled in Italy, in Venice, Ferrara, Livorno, Pesaro, Ancona, or they used the Italian peninsula as a way station or stopping point in which to actually transit east and rejoin their former Sephardic brethren who had gone east in 1492. And so, as you can see on this map, conversos actually settled in cities in the Ottoman Empire, in Alexandria and Cairo, in Tripoli and Tunis, and all throughout the Ottoman Empire, in Izmir and Istanbul, and Salonika or Thessaloniki. And one of the most significant Portuguese New Christians who fled the Iberian Peninsula and changed the course of history was that of Gracia Mendes Nassi. Born in Lisbon as Beatriz de Luna in 1510, she fled to Antwerp with her infant daughter in 1538 after her husband had died. And this was a mere 2 years after the Inquisition came to Portugal. 1542, she assumed sole control of the House of Mendes, and using her newfound power, wealth, and influence, she helped to develop an extensive escape network, assisting hundreds to thousands of new Christians flee the Iberian Peninsula and find refuge elsewhere. She herself was compelled to flee to the Italian city-states of Venice and Ferrara, at which point she reverted to Judaism herself, becoming known by the name which history has given her, Doña Gracia Nassi, or La Signora, the woman. Ultimately, in 1553, she found refuge in Constantinople or Istanbul, whereas I mentioned in part one, my remote ancestor, Moses Simon, serving as a physician to Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, interceded on behalf of Doña Gracia and her family, helping to bring them to the Ottoman Empire. And near the end of her life, Doña Gracia was a remarkable benefactor of all Jewish causes, of yeshivot and synagogues, study halls, and importantly, she acquired a long-term lease for the city of Tiberias, hoping that one day it would spur greater Jewish settlements in the Holy Land. Today, a museum and a hotel in Tiberias are named for her. And what this extraordinary life of Doña Gracia shows, as beautifully written in The Woman Who Defied Kings, The Life and Times of Doña Gracia Nassi by Andre Brooks, is that as powerful, wealthy, and influential as she was, She herself was compelled to flee several times before she could find safety and refuge. And so this really demonstrates the ephemeral nature of safety often afforded to Portuguese New Christians or conversos as they fled around the globe seeking places of safety. And a great case study is that which occurred in Ancona in the mid-16th century. Ancona is a port city on the Adriatic Sea, as you can see here, and it was part of the Papal States at this time. Pope Paul III had invited Portuguese New Christians to settle in the city to help him develop the papal economy. In return, he promised them papal protection from the Inquisition. He forbade the Inquisition to inquire into their religious beliefs or actions. This invitation was reaffirmed by his successor, Pope Julius III. And upon the death of Julius in 1555, it's estimated that about 2,700 conversos resided in the port city of Ancona. Many indeed had reverted to Judaism and were openly worshiping alongside their Jewish brethren. In 1555, Cardinal Carafa, the former Grand Inquisitor of the Roman Inquisition, ascended the throne of St. Peter and became one of the most reactionary and violently anti-Jewish pontiffs who has ever been. Within a matter of months, he issued an infamous papal bull, Cum Nimus Absurdum, which revoked the ancient liberties of Jews in the Papal States, especially Rome, compelled them to wear yellow hats, and for the first time established a ghetto, which would last until the late 19th century. Most significantly for conversos, he abrogated the previous papal protections of his predecessors and immediately had the Inquisition inquire into their beliefs and actions. Hundreds of conversos were imprisoned, were penanced, and about 24 were burnt at the stake as heretics. Doña Gracia, from the safety of Constantinople, led a short-term trade boycott, which ultimately proved unsuccessful, but she did enlist the assistance of the Ottoman Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent, who did successfully obtain the release of conversos who were languishing in papal jails. But nonetheless, this story, this episode of Ancona really demonstrates the devastating consequences which could arise with a mere change of leadership. Now, a few decades later, Portuguese New Christians arrived in the great city on the Amstel in Northern Europe, now, of course, known as Amsterdam. But they were worshiping in the privacy of their homes. In 1615 or 16, they established a modus vivendi, an agreement with the fledgling Dutch Republic, which had proclaimed its independence from Spain a few decades earlier. In return for being able to openly profess Judaism, they could not threaten the integrity of the body politic. They could not challenge Christian dogmas. And in 1639, 3 synagogues merged, and the Sephardic community of Amsterdam was formally unified or united. In 1648, Ashkenazim from the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, fleeing the ravages of the 30 Years' War, which left millions dead, which devastated the map of Europe, arrived in the city seeking refuge. They had been massacred in the infamous Cossack revolt of Bogdan Khmelnytsky. Tens of thousands had fallen to the sword. And in 1675, on August 2nd, the Portuguese synagogue in Amsterdam, as seen here on the top right, was officially inaugurated, quite simply known as the Asnoga. It is the mother synagogue of Spanish and Portuguese synagogues around the world. And as one contemporary remarked, who observed the scene that day, as seen on the bottom right, this was a day to be ranked among the happiest, which was full of pomp and ceremony, which their nation saw since the destruction of Jerusalem. Now, when Portuguese New Christians came to Amsterdam and other places, but especially this city, it has to be remembered that they were people of memory. Coming from Portugal or from the Iberian Peninsula, they had no knowledge of normative Judaism, including the Talmud. Everything had been direct examination of the Old Testament. And so this was really demonstrated quite tragically in the story of Oriol Acosta, or Da Costa. Born in Portugal to a new Christian family, he was made aware at an early age, it seems, that he was of Jewish origin. He had Jewish forebears. And eventually he fled Portugal for Hamburg and Amsterdam with his mother and brothers. But because he only had direct access to the Old Testament, he seems to have come to espouse a neo-Karaite interpretation, an idealized law of Moses. And when he came to these cities in Northern Europe, he encountered rabbinic authority for the first time. This struck him as very much like the Catholic Church, which he despised. He viewed the Talmud and rabbinic Judaism as effectively corrupting the law of Moses. And so he challenged rabbinic authority. and dissuaded others from following the rabbis. He was excommunicated several times and lived in isolation for about 7 years until he could bear it no longer. He did seek reconciliation, and as a precondition, as you can see in this image, he had to publicly recant his errors in the synagogue. He was lashed or whipped symbolically 39 times, the biblical punishment of malchut, and he was forced to lie on the ground so the congregation could walk on top of him. This was deeply humiliating. Acosta went home, finished writing his autobiography, Exemplar Humanae Vitae, Example of Human Life, and he ultimately committed suicide. A much younger contemporary, who of course was to gain international fame as a philosopher, was that of Baruch or Bento Spinoza, later Latinized to Benedictus. Spinoza was born in Amsterdam to a Portuguese New Christian family who had reverted to Judaism before he was born. He seems to have had a traditional Jewish upbringing, being educated at the Talmud Torah school in Amsterdam. And his teachers even included Menashe ben Israel, who led Jewish readmission to England. But in his late teens or early 20s, it seems he came to espouse radical notions. And accordingly, on July 27, 1656, at the age of 24, the Mahamad, or the leadership of the community of Amsterdam, issued the most severe ban or cherem, perhaps in the history of Judaism. Quote, by decree of the angels and command of the holy men, we excommunicate, curse, and damn Baruch de Spinoza for his abominable heresies and monstrous deeds. And a copy of the excommunication is here on the bottom right. And of course, it's still extant in the archives of the Amsterdam community. These views were later written by Spinoza in his famous work, Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, in which he made these quite revolutionary claims, especially for the mid-17th century. He rejected the Mosaic authorship of the Pentateuch, the immortality of the soul, the binding nature of the Torah upon future generations, and even the very concept of a providential deity. This was, in the eyes of many, as one critic put it, a book forged in hell by the devil himself. For Spinoza, it seems God, what he termed the uncaused first cause, was synonymous with the totality of creation, or as Spinoza quite simply put it, Deus sive natura, God or nature. Now, unlike Acosta, Spinoza never sought to be reconciled. He never attempted to have the ban or the cherem lifted, and indeed, it remains in place to this day. But fascinatingly, he never converted to Christianity. And so for that reason, because he in a way continued his affiliation with the Jewish people by common origin or kinship, but not by faith, he has sometimes been referred to as history's first secular Jew. Now, Spinoza's teacher, who came on the scene and helped greatly to influence the course of history, was that of Menashe ben Israel. Born a Portuguese New Christian, Manuel Dias Soeiro, he moved as a young boy to Amsterdam and eventually became a leading rabbi in the community. In 1644, he encountered a new Christian, Antonio de Montesinos, who told him that in his travels throughout South America, he had encountered a remnant of the 10 lost tribes. This sparked immediate messianic fervor and expectation amongst Jews and conversos, and Ben Israel wrote a treatise entitled Hope of Israel, or Esperanza de Israel, in 1650. This made him famous, and parlaying his fame, he went to England, where he directly petitioned Oliver Cromwell, then serving as Lord Protector of the English Commonwealth, or head of state, following the abolition of the English monarchy in 1649. He beseeched Cromwell using a combination of religious, including messianic and economic arguments, to formally readmit Jews for the first time since they were officially expelled under Edward I in 1290. Although Cromwell was sympathetic to the petition, he did not formally readmit Jews, who were effectively Portuguese New Christians at this point, but he did not block them from coming in. And so they were effectively allowed to stay there unmolested. And so at this point, 1655 to 56 marks the origin of the Sephardic community of London, when Jews were permitted to return and resettle in England. And even following the restoration of the English monarchy in 1660, King Charles II permitted the Jews to remain in his kingdom. A Spanish and Portuguese synagogue was founded, and Samuel Pepys is a noted diarist who also observed the Great Plague and Fire of London in the mid-1660s, visited the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue a few times. And in his diary in 1663, he notes that while most of the prayers were in Hebrew, they said special prayers for the king, which they pronounced in Portuguese in homage to their heritage. In 1701, the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue moved to Bevis Marks, to the location it inhabits to this day. Hacham Davi Nieto, who came from Italy, had to deal in these following decades with many conversos or new Christians who held Spinozist or Acostian ideas. And the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue at Bevis Marks is the only synagogue in Europe to have held continuous services for more than 300 years. Against such a backdrop emerged one of the most singular figures in Jewish history who caused great upheaval throughout Europe, that of Sabbatai Tzvi. Born in Smyrna or Izmir, he seems to have been extremely charismatic and enchanting and was proclaimed the Messiah in 1648, the year the 30 Years' War ended. Throughout the 1650s, he preached his messianic gospel in numerous cities in the Ottoman Empire, including Alexandria, Jerusalem, Cairo, and Istanbul, including in the Ahrida synagogue that I visited a couple of years ago. Numerous communities throughout Europe and the Ottoman Empire, as you can see in Amsterdam, Hamburg, Frankfurt, Italy, and the Ottoman Empire, Greece, Turkey, Syria, Egypt, were prepared to follow him. He made a number of radical changes, including transforming Tisha B'Av, the Great Day of Lamentation, into a day of feasting, which caused massive upheaval. In 1666, he was imprisoned in Istanbul under the orders of the Sultan, and under threat of death, he converted to Islam. Many of his followers chose to follow him in this regard, believing it was part of the divine redemption. And so while they officially practiced Islam, they secretly practiced Judaism. And these followers, known as the Donmeh, there is a remnant that survives to this day. So across the world now, across the Atlantic on the other side of the world, were the Crypto-Jews, or the Conversos, who had gone there, beginning with Christopher Columbus. These Cristianos Nuevos came in increasing numbers throughout the 1500s. Many of them had fled, seeking to escape the long arm or reach of the Inquisition. Famously among them, and included the martyrs we mentioned in part 2, Luis de Carvajal Almoso, Tomás Trevino de Sobremonte, and Francisco Maldonado de Silva. The Portuguese counterparts, the Cristãos Novos, had also fled to Brazil when the Portuguese discovered the country in 1500. In the 1620s or 1630 or so, the Dutch fleet conquered some of these Portuguese possessions in South America and the Caribbean. They particularly focused, the Dutch, upon building a settlement in the state of Pernambuco in northeastern Brazil, centered around the city of Recife. And at this point, Governor Johan Maurits, as seen on the top right, permitted these Cristãos Novos, or Conversos, to openly revert to Judaism. They established a synagogue, Kahal Sor Israel, as seen on the bottom right. And at its zenith, by 1645, Recife had between 1,000 to 1,450 Jews or so, seems comprising about 5 to 10% of the general population, and roughly comparable in size to the Amsterdam Jewish community. Amsterdam thereupon sent resources and personnel, including Rabbi Isaac Aboab de Fonseca, as seen here, to assist in the growth and continued development of the community. Aboab thus holds the distinction of being the first rabbi in the history of the Western Hemisphere. Now, in 1654, the Portuguese reconquered Pernambuco, or Recife, and gave the Dutch and these openly professing Jews, who were former conversos, 3 months in which to leave. Many returned to Amsterdam, including Rabbi Isaac Aboab, who actually became the Hacham, or Sephardic chief rabbi of the community, in which position he actually presided over the excommunication of Spinoza 2 years later. Other Crypto-Jews, of course, island hopped throughout the Caribbean. And as you can see on the map, they went to Dutch and English colonies. They went to Dutch Guiana, now known as Suriname, to Barbados, to Curacao, and into Jamaica. And it has to be remembered the milieu in which these conversos were island hopping. Inquisitorial tribunals existed and were ruthlessly persecuting them and burning their co-religionists in Mexico City, in Lima, in Cartagena, and all throughout Brazil. And so this truly amplified the perils of the very life and limb of Crypto-Jews as they sought to live in this new world. Nonetheless, they were so well integrated and so integral to the growth of the economy and society in this region that even as notable a figure as Adam Smith, known as the father of capitalism, in his great work, The Wealth of Nations, in 1776, the very same year as the American Declaration of Independence, noted, Portuguese Jews persecuted by the Inquisition, stripped of their fortunes and banished to Brazil, introduced the sugarcane and established the industry. 23 Jews from Recife, famously, in 1654, arrived in New Amsterdam, later renamed to New York in 1664 when the English conquered the colony. Attempting to be admitted, Peter Stuyvesant, the governor of the settlement, wrote a letter to the Dutch West India Company recommending that this deceitful race, enemies and blasphemers of Christ, be not allowed to trouble this new colony. Cognizant of their extensive business acumen and incredible trading networks, the Dutch West India Company compelled Stuyvesant to admit them, and even more, to give them permission to live, trade, and travel, and to be given their own burial ground. And once they were admitted that September day in 1654, they founded Congregation Shereth Israel, the very first congregation in North America that endures to this day. More significantly, this marks the beginning of American Jewish history. And following the establishment of Congregation Shereth Israel, a number of communities and synagogues were established all along the Eastern Seaboard. As you can see, ladies and gentlemen, from New York, they established the Spanish and Portuguese synagogues in Montreal, in Newport, in Savannah, in Charleston, complementing the already existing synagogues throughout the Caribbean, in Curacao, Barbados, St. Thomas, Suriname, and of course in Recife. And interestingly, again, an indelible testament to that messianic belief, these synagogue names of the Spanish and Portuguese synagogues all hint at a final redemption. They are variants of the words remnant, hope, dispersed, or salvation of Israel. And so, ladies and gentlemen, this geographical circuit of conversos, of Sfaradim, of new Christians really bridged the globe. As the academic Studimon Halevi has said, Sephardic Jewishness bridged the Caribbean and the Atlantic to Europe and even to Spanish and Portuguese colonies in Africa and Asia. It was truly a global network. And the cultural coherence that was the result of multiple and intersecting networks underpinned the remarkable capacity to cross religious, political, and cultural divides. And as you can see, the white on the map is where the Spanish traveled, and the blue is the Portuguese. And so new Christians would be found everywhere, in Lima and Panama, on the west coast of South America, and Recife and Rio on the east, and Mozambique and Goa and Cochin and India, and Macau and Nagasaki, Manila. They truly went around the world. Now, what about the crypto-Jews or conversos who remained on the Iberian Peninsula? Those who stayed in the eye of the hurricane, so to speak. Looking at two brief case studies. The first are those who remained on the island of Majorca and the Balearic Islands off the coast of Spain in the Mediterranean. In 1435, the entire Jewish community had been forcibly converted en masse. In 1488, inquisitors under the leadership of Tomás de Torquemada arrived on the islands while the last survivors of this great conversion remained alive. Over the course of the next half century, the Inquisition was quite brutal, subjecting more than 1,300 persons on the islands to various forms of penance, to trials, and many of them were burnt at the stake for the heresy of crypto-Judaism. The Inquisition seems to have gone relatively dormant for the next 130 years or so. Nonetheless, despite the grave threats they were under, the Shuetas, or these crypto-Jews, maintained contact with Jewish communities, especially in Italy. The Inquisition unfortunately returned with a vengeance in the late 17th century and condemned hundreds of crypto-Jews and scores of autos de fe in a period known as the Cremadissa, or the mass burnings. Perhaps the most infamous act of faith, or auto de fe, in the history of the Balearic Islands was that which occurred on May 6, 1691, when 37 people were relaxed and 3 individuals were burnt alive. Raphael Valls, the spiritual leader of the crypto-Jewish community, Catalina Tarangi, and her brother, Raphael Tarangi. This so-called bonfire of the Jews was witnessed by 30,000 people. Nonetheless, they continued to marry endogenously and hold fast to Judaism that they could. They suffered extensive socioeconomic discrimination well into the 20th century. In 2011, on the 320th anniversary of this 1691 Act of Faith, the president, or the regional president of the Balearic Islands, apologized for the first time in Iberian history. And as you can see, this is him shaking hands with Rabbi Nisan ben Avraham, a direct descendant of Raphael Valls. That very same year, Rabbi Nisan Karlitz, seen here, a Haredi or ultra-Orthodox rabbi in Bnei Barak and a nephew of the famous 20th century sage of the Chazon Ish, recognized the 18,000 descendants of the Shuetas as being Jewish. As he put it, since throughout the generations, most of them married among themselves, they are from our brethren, the children of Israel. In Belmonte, perhaps the most famous story associated with crypto-Judaism, the Jewish community had been founded in the 13th century, located in a rather mountainous region. But our story begins in 1917, when Samuel Schwartz, as seen on the right, a Polish Jewish engineer, went to that region for work. He encountered an individual or a gentleman named Baltazar Pereira de Souza, who told him that his family secretly practiced Judaism. Schwartz told him he was Jewish, but not necessarily believing the other. De Souza brought Schwartz to Belmonte to meet the old women, or rezaderas, who were the guardians of the tradition. Remember, Crypto-Judaism was an oral transmission of knowledge, and so women were the leaders of Crypto-Judaism. He finally convinced the old woman, the leader of the community, that he was indeed a Jew because he pronounced, of course, the foundational creed of Judaism. Shema Yisrael, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord is our God, the Lord is one. And at the name Adonai, the old woman covered her face and said, he knows the name of our Lord. He is one of us. The Jews of Belmonte, or the new Christians, truly believed they were the last remaining Jews on the planet. They had been entirely cut off from all other communities. And following this, he was welcomed into the community, and Schwartz proceeded to write a book in 1925, detailing the rituals and beliefs of the new Christians. What were some of the rituals or social customs? Well, they certainly observed Shabbat to some extent. They lit candles on Friday nights in closets, cupboards, pots, or other hidden places so no one else could see. They baked matzot or matzahs in secret on Passover. And they held a Seder of sorts commemorating the Exodus from Egypt, albeit on a different date on the Jewish calendar, so no one could denounce them to the Inquisition. Circumcision was simply too dangerous to perform because it would readily identify someone as a crypto-Jew. And the prayers certainly changed over time. Normative Judaism did fade away, leaving only a remnant of Hebrew in some of the prayers, such as the name of God in the Shema. Most importantly, they venerated fasting above feasting and came to elevate Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement, and the Fast of Esther above all else. Crypto-Jews in Belmonte, as I suspect in other times and places, really felt a particular affinity with Queen Esther, the heroine of the Purim story. For did she not also have to hide her Jewishness? Mordechai had commanded her not to reveal her people or kindred until the time was right. And indeed, near the end of the story, before Queen Esther, a crypto-Jew, went to seek salvation for the Jewish people, she implored all the Jews of Shushan to fast for 3 days. And so the women, especially of Belmonte, canonized Queen Esther. They established her as their patron saint. She became Santa Esterica. And this is a marked example of syncretism, of the merging or amalgamation of rituals and beliefs in Judaism and Christianity. Women in Belmonte fasted for 3 days, often taking turns around the clock, literally fulfilling the command of Esther. They viewed the fast as a symbol of martyrdom and a source of strength to perpetuate their collective crypto-Jewish identity. They believed that this was a type of atonement for the sin of living a double life, and they certainly believed it would hasten the coming of the redemption. In 1996, a synagogue, Beit Eliyahu, was built, and a plaque nearby the entrance reads, "Here in this place, the chain of our tradition has not been severed. As a result of governmental decrees, the Jewish residents of this village were forced to publicly deny their Jewish religion, but they maintain their Judaism in their homes and in their hearts. Here, the Jewish soul was never lost. Here, it remains forever." In 2005, a Jewish museum was built, and in 2019, a square was inaugurated in the municipality named in honor of Samuel Schwartz, for the man who had done so much to bring Belmonte to the consciousness of the world. Around that same time, Artur Carlos de Barros Basto, a Portuguese army officer who had made incredible efforts to effectively resurrect the Jewish community in Porto, became involved. He made rather Herculean efforts to reintegrate these Moranos, Conversos, our new Christians from the surrounding region of Belmonte into the normative Jewish community, against great opposition, I might add. He unfortunately was targeted, unfairly maligned, and forced to resign from the army. He became known as the Portuguese Dreyfus, akin to what happened to Alfred Dreyfus in France in the late 19th century. However, he was posthumously rehabilitated by the Portuguese Parliament a few years ago, thanks to his granddaughter. And in 2019, the Jewish community of Porto financed the production of a film, Sefarad, detailing the incredible story of Artur Carlos de Barros Basto and the great efforts he made to reintegrate and reunify the crypto-Jews into the normative Jewish community. Centuries ago, ladies and gentlemen, in the mid-12th century, as the golden age in Sefarad was coming to an end, a very young Maimonides in his late 20s picked up pen and paper and proceeded to write an extremely significant letter in the annals of history, known as the Igeret HaShamad, or his Epistle on Martyrdom. He wrote this letter to soothe and comfort crypto-Jews. A puritanical group of Muslims known as Almohads had crossed the Straits of Gibraltar from Morocco and conquered much of the Iberian Peninsula. compelling Jews to convert to Islam, leave, or be killed. And many Jews were unsure what to do. Should they convert or should they offer themselves up al Kiddush Hashem, as was the traditional norm in Jewish history? Maimonides implored them to choose life. Directly citing from the Torah, he says, Deuteronomy itself tells us, you shall choose life so that you and your offspring will live. He notes that according to halacha, transgressions under duress are not to be punished. Dissimulation or feigning adherence to save a life is permitted. And he gave historical examples. Famously, he cited from the Babylonian Talmud itself in Tractate Avodah Zarah 18b, which tells us that Rabbi Meir Baal Hanes, a famed sage who's buried in Tiberias to this day, famous for his miracles, escaped Roman pursuers because he pretended to eat non-kosher food. He hid his Judaism, thereby saving his life, whereupon he fled to Babylonia. Rabbeinu Gershom of Germany, a leading authority in Ashkenaz, 2 centuries before Rashi, had already ruled that Jews who sought to return, who had been converted to Christianity, were to be fully accepted in the community. And so Maimonides concludes that not once in history are crypto-Jews labeled sinners. And in fact, it's harder to live a double life, always looking over one shoulder, never quite sure when the Inquisition is going to snatch you, your family, or your friends. And so correspondingly, the sanctification of life, the Kiddush HaChaim, must be greater. Therefore, Maimonides says, my co-religionists, be strong and take courage, and the opportunity will avail itself to ultimately revert to Judaism. And so certainly this letter and the sentiments expressed in it were relied upon by future generations of Jews in all sorts of situations to preserve life if need be. And in our own time and living memory, this was known as Überleben in the Yiddish in the Holocaust. A number of rabbis told Jews to do whatever they had to in order to live, and not merely to survive, but to outlive the enemy, to deny them the victory of one more Jew's demise, and by implication, to keep alive future generations. As Cecil Roth, the great British historian of the 20th century and the editor-in-chief of the Encyclopedia Judaica, put it, Crypto-Judaism, thus in one form or another, is as old as the Jew himself. Today, ladies and gentlemen, what does the world of Sefarad look like in the 21st century? Well, about 15 million Jews or so worldwide, 2 to 3 million Sephardim, about 15 to 20%. 45,000 Jews in Spain, 3,000 in Portugal, but the numbers are growing. In 2015, Spain and Portugal promulgated legislation offering citizenship to descendants of the exiles as a type of compensation or reparation. And more than 200,000 applications for citizenship have come in from around the globe. And so to me, this certainly evokes a call to remember and to bear witness for posterity. This also, in the 21st century, has allowed us to bear witness and to be privileged to see the return of emerging communities of Bnei Anusim, of descendants of Jews who were coerced or compelled to convert to Christianity and were unable or unwilling to revert to Judaism in previous centuries. This was truly a hidden world, concealed for centuries from the outside. But these individuals, their descendants and communities, expressed a genuine attachment against great odds to their Jewish traditions, beliefs, and memories. And in our own time, these emerging communities of crypto-Jews come from Portugal, Spain, Brazil, Mexico, the American Southwest, and many other places. In 1492, as the exiles of Sefarad prepared to depart on an unknown voyage, Don Isaac Abravanel led the contingent of Jews who sailed east into the Mediterranean. He did not know what the future would hold for the Jewish people. Would the narrative or the saga of Sefarad end with the expulsion? He wrote, near the end of his own life, he died in Italy, a famous commentary on the Torah and the Tanakh. In commenting on chapter 30 of Devarim or Deuteronomy, the very same chapter that Maimonides invoked in his epistle on martyrdom, Abravanel said at that time in the late 1490s, quote, the nation in exile, the Jewish people, is divided into 2 parts. The smaller part are those that hold on to the religion and follow the Torah, while the other part, the larger part of the people, are those who, because of the troubles and heaviness of the exile, are under duress, the Anusim. Yet, at the end of days, they will return. And so the legacy of Sefarad lives on in us as well. In 2008, a study was published in the American Journal of Human Genetics, analyzing the Y chromosome transmitted from father to son across the generations of over 1,100 men throughout the Iberian Peninsula. And startlingly, 20% are descended from Sephardic Jews, a testament to convivencia, to that golden age of Jews, Christians, and Muslims living with and peacefully respectfully working with one another, and at the same time to the great social and religious intolerance, to the forced conversions that occurred over the centuries. Perhaps an even more groundbreaking study was published in December 2018 in Nature Communications. 6,500 people were analyzed. Their DNA was taken along the mitochondrial line and the Y chromosome. And to their astonishment, researchers found that 25% of Latin Americans have Sephardic genetic ancestry. They are descended from New Christians. And the genetics prove the historical record. In Brazil, they are descended from Portuguese. And in Central America and the western part of South America, they are descended from Spain. And not just anywhere in Spain, but particularly focused on the central and southern parts of Spain, the heartland of the biblical Sefarad. Today, there are 650 million people or so in Latin America. 60 million Latinos or Hispanics in the United States. And so if we take into account those incredible numbers, plus the 20% of modern day Iberian men who have Sephardic ancestry, the total number of descendants of Sefarad who are not Jewish necessarily, most of them are not, comes to about 200 million people around the globe. And while they are not halakhically Jewish, and while most of them may not wish to return, many of them do. And they are indeed not merely from the seed of Israel, from Zerah Israel, but they form an integral part of the saga of Sefarad. They are from the seed of Sefarad. And so, ladies and gentlemen, to wrap up, we see a tree of Sefarad. But in popular consciousness, it has unfortunately only focused on what happened up to 1492, to the Jews who departed Spain, who went to North Africa or throughout the Eastern Mediterranean, to the Levant, the Near East, the Ottoman Empire. And yet half of the tree has been missing. The Western Sephardim are the ones who founded the great cities and communities in the north of Europe and throughout the New World. And the Bnei Anusim are emerging only now in our own time, and their story remains to be told. So the ancient roots of Sefarad are deeply planted, going back 3,000 years to the days of King Solomon. It extends throughout space and time, but we can now truly see we need all the branches to come together to see the magnificent and rather majestic saga of Sefarad in its totality. Descendants of Sefarad who have changed the modern era include just the following few. Chaim Solomon, known as the financier of the American Revolution, along with Robert Morris, born in Poland to descendants of Spanish and Portuguese Jews who left Spain following the 1492 Edict of Expulsion. Sir Moses Montefiore, the great 19th century British philanthropist who assisted many of his co-religionists across Europe, the Ottoman Empire, and the land of Israel. Emma Lazarus, whose poem, The New Colossus, is embossed on the base of the Statue of Liberty. And she was a direct descendant of the 23 Jews who arrived in New Amsterdam from Recife in 1654. U.S. Supreme Court Justice Benjamin Cardozo, one of the most revered jurists in American history, who served in the 1930s. Sir Ernst Boris Chain, PhD, as you can see on the right, who along with Howard Florey and Alexander Fleming, received the 1945 Nobel Prize in Medicine for the discovery of penicillin, the world's first modern antibiotic. And of course, perhaps most significantly for the time in which we live, Albert Bourla, the current CEO of Pfizer, who is helping to save the world from the global pandemic. He was born in Salonika or Thessaloniki, not merely to descendants of the 1492 exiles, but to parents who survived the Shoah or the Holocaust. And so at the end of all our exploring, as the poet T.S. Eliot, and a St. Louis native where I'm speaking to you from, remarked in one of his last poems, Little Gidding, will be to arrive where we started and know the place for the first time. And so, ladies and gentlemen, in conclusion, the untold story, Sefarad, the untold story that changed the world, is an extraordinary one. From Hasdai ibn Shaprut in the Golden Age to Maimonides, from Don Isaac of Bravanel to Doña Gracia Nasi, from Menashe ben Israel to Emma Lazarus and Albert Bourla today, this is a story that is continuing. It has changed the course of history. It has transformed various aspects and a whole host of disciplines of human life: genetics, religions, geography, politics, and economies. Perhaps for all of us listening in, this also includes our own ancestors, who perhaps on a much smaller scale, they endured unimaginable triumphs, trials, and tribulations, yet they persevered, enabling us all to be here today. And so, in the end, ladies and gentlemen, we remember this history, we preserve this memory, and we perpetuate this legacy. For as the late Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks, the former chief rabbi of the United Kingdom, expressed it most eloquently, we did not come from nowhere, nor does our story end with us. We are leaves on an ancient tree, chapters in a long and still being written story, a letter in the scroll of the book, of the people of the book. Take it, cherish it, learn to understand and to love it, and pass it on to future generations, for you are a member of an eternal people. Let their eternity live on in you. And so that is it, ladies and gentlemen. I hope you have enjoyed this three-part series on Sefarad, the untold story that changed the world. Thank you to Michael Steinberger, the founder and CEO of Jewish Heritage Alliance, to the entire JHA team, and to all our co-hosting partners around the globe. A very special thank you to Corin Brown at the Society for Crypto-Judaic Studies for having put me in touch with Michael and for having made this series possible. Most of all, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for attending and for your support. While it may be the end of this series, it is the beginning of many more. So please stay tuned for future webinars and events, stay in touch, and as Christopher Columbus put it in his letters to his sons, Bezrat Hashem, with the help or assistance of God, Jewish Heritage Alliance and myself personally look forward to meeting all of you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Isaac. Thank you for delivering another stellar, enlightening presentation, bringing much needed clarity and attention to the Sefarad legacy. We look forward to your continued educational webinars, embracing the far-reaching narrative and unfolding events of the Sefarad legacy in more detail as we go forward with future webinars. Thank you again. And now we're going to move quickly because we are extending beyond the hour. I'd like to introduce our musical guest. Dr. Ariel Lazaros is a composer, classical guitarist, singer, and musical director of the Israeli Ladino Orchestra. His PhD work includes field research of the Spanish and Portuguese melodies in Jewish communities of Gibraltar. He has recorded several international albums inspired by his Sephardic heritage and performed worldwide as musical ambassador on behalf of the Amiel Bakihila, Israeli Ministry of Diaspora Affairs program. Dr. Lazaros is a musical lecturer at Givat Washington College and Rimon School of Music in Israel. Today, we feature Lazaros' new rendition to the High Holidays Piyut, sacred poems, Achot Ketana, which means little sister, written by Avram Hazan of Herona in the 13th century. This piyut is sung by Sephardic communities from the West and the East just before the entrance of the New Year's at Rosh Hashanah's Eve. Take it away, Ariel.
Hi, Michael. I'm very excited to be here. Shana Tova. I would say Erev Tov, good evening, but it's not Erev everywhere. It's really a big pleasure to be among such a distinguished guest. Thank you, Dr. Amon, for such an enlightening and profound presentation, and really an honor. So I'm, as you know, an Israeli-born composer, musician, but my family originated in Gibraltar, which is a very ancient Sephardic community. As a professionalist in the music field, I always felt an obligation to explore my Sephardi heritage and even to enhance the Sephardi experience through creativity. So we will premiere, world premiere in a way, tonight my new rendition of Achot Ketana, which is one of the most important texts that Sephardi communities have during these high holidays. I have prepared a very brief presentation, which I will show to you about Achot Ketana. Okay, so the Piyut, which is a sacred poem, was written, as Michael said, by Avraham Chazan of Herona in the 13th century. The text is recited by Sephardic communities just before the beginning of the new Hebrew year. Achot Ketana means little sister in Hebrew, and the term is a metaphor used by the poet to describe the people of Israel, a small nation praying to the Almighty amidst troubled water. 13th century Spain has become lesser safe for Jews. The Reconquista from the north and the extreme Islamic forces from the south destabilized the previous tolerant Moorish caliphate, leading the destruction of Jewish communities. Following these outcomes, Sephardic poets and rabbinical leaders write more and more poems with a call of returning to Zion. A little bit about the text. The poem is written in the strophic form of the Muwashach, what we call in Hebrew shir ezor, which basically means that each stanza alternates with a refrain that carries the same rhyme scheme of the first stanza. You see the first stanza in white, and the refrain in white carries the same rhyme scheme. Achot ketana tefiloteha, tachel shana uvirchoteha. A little bit about the music. I composed this text with the inspiration of both my Gibraltarian and Israeli roots. My grandfather, the late Abraham Benisso, was the Chazan of Gibraltar Synagogue and a key figure in the Spanish and Portuguese cantorial world. And his singing echoes in my heart almost in everything I do. The song is a part from my next album project called Shirim Chaim that is due to be released, please God, in 2022. The unique video that we filmed in a World Heritage Site here in Israel, the ancient city of Ovdat in Mount Negev, adds another layer of interpretation to the mystic text. The beautiful choreography that you will see is led by dancers from the Jerusalem Academy. I hope you find comfort and strength in this work like we did while recording and filming it. Wishing you all a very happy and fruitful year, and may we have the same love between us like the love of the Almighty to the little sister. So this is the video of my new composition with the old Sephardic text of the High Holidays, Achot Ketana. תפילותיה אורחה ועונה תהילותיה אל נא רפנה לה למחלותיה תכלה שנה וקללותיה זמירה שבת חשקת הגביר לחפוץ קרבה תודה ותאוויר מלב דבת נפשה ותסיר לבקש אהבת כלולותיה תכלה שנה וקללותיה חיזקו וגילו קישות גמר לצור חילו בריתו שמר לכם ותעלו לציון ואמר סובבנו מסילותיה תחל שנה וברכותיה מסילותיה
וברכותיה, מסילותיה, תחל שנה, וברכותיה, ברכות קטנה, תפילותיה.
Thank you, Ariel. Thank you for that
Thank you.
wonderful, moving musical presentation. We appreciate having first dibs on presenting this new work. Thank you very much. And we look
My
forward,
pleasure.
absolutely, and we look forward to future collaboration with you. Shana Tova and best wishes on your work.
Thank you very much, Shana Tova, and Yada Buena, as we say in Ladino. And you can watch the video, of course, on my YouTube channel and see more of the Israeli Ladino Orchestra video. Thank you again for having me at this beautiful Jewish Heritage Alliance event.
Thank you, Ariel. So in closing, I would like to reiterate that Jewish Heritage Alliance underlying mission is to research, capture, and promote the Sefarad legacy. One of the central platforms in pursuit of our mission is the delivery of these educational webinar programs. These programs are delivered in a variety of formats, always featuring experts in the subject that is being discussed. Your participation is critical to our success, and we would like to send you a questionnaire to help us better understand what interests you most. We ask that you please help us to develop the best programs possible by taking a moment and responding to the questionnaire when it arrives in your inbox. We thank you in advance for your cooperation. So lastly, I would like to thank you for your interest and participation in our programs. We thank those of you who have contributed to our efforts by donations and or other forms of assistance. We ask everyone here today to please get involved by taking part in making a contribution, be it via helping fund our mission or any other form of help that you deem more comfortable. Those of you who wish to make a donation can do so at www.jewishheritagealliance.com/donate or in any fashion you deem comfortable. And finally, be on the lookout for our next Sefarad education webinar planned for October, where we will be expanding beyond the introductory three-part series. We will be sending you an email announcement with details and registration information. For now, please follow us on social media and our website at www.jewishheritagealliance.com. Thank you for making this event a success. See you next time. Bye-bye.